So, here's a little follow-up video about the Junkulele. I didn't want to get into too many of the details and the nerdy stuff in the original video. I figured I would just make a video that's fun to watch and see the thing happen, and then actually explain all the reasons why you probably shouldn't ever waste your time making a ukulele or any other type of instrument out of CDs, but why I did it anyways. The reasoning was that, you know, I put out that challenge looking for suggestions from people, and honestly this was something that was in my head, was to make an instrument out of them, because I love the idea of taking, you know, a musical product and then having it create music again. A lot of people suggested guitars and whatnot, and so I did this because what I wanted to do if I was going to make an instrument out of CDs is I wanted the CDs to actually resonate the music to actually come from the CDs, and not just have them adorn a guitar or be crushed up into like a solid body guitar. I wanted them to be the soundboard, and they are right now. They're a terrible soundboard. So first I figured out how to melt them and heat them up and bend them, and did a bunch of experiments. You can see that if you heat the side with the ink on it, it looks terrible. So you have to heat them from the one side, and they're pretty easy to melt in shape and form. It doesn't take a lot, but they are brittle. They're brittle when they're not warm, so you end up having a lot of problems with them cracking and whatnot. My first thought was the more CDs, the better, the stronger it would be. So I bent them in 90 degrees and tried riveting them together, thinking that that would give it the strength it needed, and it actually just made it weaker because the sides weren't one solid piece. They were two pieces. The rivets weren't holding up good, and it made it heavier, and it was going to be less likely to resonate because the material was thicker. So I scratched that idea, and I figured out if I bent them on two sides, I could make the sides of the body and whatnot, and that would work. My idea, since you can't really drill and screw these things too well, they break real easy, I decided to try riveting them, which works pretty well. I used a soldering iron to, you know, make the holes because the drill would just crack them. But you do end up cracking them a lot in the process of riveting. They just like to crack. And then I went to epoxy, and I epoxied the top on, and that seemed to work pretty well. So, you know, I was able to make this very basic shape, but there are parts of it that have cracked since I made it. It's under tension from the strings, it's starting to buckle a little bit. You notice in the video I put that one wooden rod connecting the tail to the neck. Just to give myself a fighting chance of keeping this thing together, I put this crossbar. So maybe it will actually not just collapse when I string it up. I wanted to keep that as minimal as possible, so the actual resonance and sound was coming from the CDs and not some wooden structure underneath them. If I were to do this again, I would make that a little bit stronger. I might even put a sound post in it, like a violin has, to keep the top from collapsing. But I think that you could, between melting and epoxy and rivets, you could make a better body. Now the neck was fun because a friend of mine, I mentioned him in the video, Stuart Morrison, he works for a company called CNC Router Parts, and they were at the Maker Faire in San Francisco. He was teasing pictures of them making these ukuleles for the Maker Faire, and he showed his cutoff pin. And so I, being the upcyclist guy, of course, was like, oh, I can make all sorts of stuff out of those cutoffs. So he said, all right, I'll send some to you. He mailed a box to me. So I thought it would be really funny to make a ukulele out of a ukulele scrap. Now, you'll see in the video that I joined these two pieces of scrap wood together to make the length of the neck, because I didn't think, well, one wasn't long enough, but I didn't really do it right. I thought if I did this little, like, kind of lap joint and I put a dowel through, I ended up using a drumstick for a dowel, that the heel of the instrument would get cut up through that part, so that's where the joint would be, was under the heel. I ended up being off by several inches, so that whole joint was just useless and it all got cut off. I just ended up it's just a butt joint between the two pieces. But the fingerboard going across the top plus a little spline I put in there was enough to kind of make that work, to just join those two pieces together. For a real guitar, it wouldn't be strong enough. You'd have to do something else. The fingerboard is made from a piece of walnut I had left over from when I made the Palletwood and walnut whiskey cabinet, just a scrap, and the bridge is made of that as well. The bridge and the tailpiece I kind of messed up. Even the whole scale and proportions of this thing are weird. I was just sort of making it up as I went. I wanted it to be wider and bigger than a ukulele because my big hands don't fit ukuleles well. I ended up going a little too wide for the length. And then I over-guessed I thought that the strings I'd be able to space out pretty wide, and that didn't work. I went too wide there. So everything's like a little wrong. Next time I proportioned it a little bit different. The tuners are just some scrap tuners I had that I'll actually turn the wrong way because they're from a different guitar. The things that didn't make it into this build that I was real excited about doing is I wanted to show the potential to use the other materials in the CD packaging. Specifically the cardboard and the plastic wrapper that goes over the whole thing that seals it all in. So I was hoping to include those into this mandolin, and I ended up not doing that. But so my idea was I epoxied the cases together into a brick, and I was going to use that brick kind of like a Peter Brown type thing. I just like encased them all in epoxy, or like the countertops that they use in like labs are made with just like epoxy and like cardboard or whatever, and they just like stick them all together. So I was like, well, I'll do that, and then I'll use the cases and I'll cut those out to make some of the parts, like the bridge, for instance, or the tailpiece I could have made right out of the case. But what I didn't do like a moron is they're hollow on the inside because it's a pocket, it's a sleeve. I didn't cut them apart, so I epoxied these things together, but then all the insides didn't get epoxy into them. So when you went and cut into it to start cutting my bridge out, they all just started coming apart in the middles because every other layer doesn't have epoxy. So I got frustrated by that, and I wanted to wrap this up and get the video done, so I didn't want to go and do it again. But I might do it again and try it and see if I can make some other stuff with these cases. And then I saved all the plastic wrappers, and I believe they're HDPE. So I melted them down in my little toaster oven, and I put them in my homemade hydraulic press. And I made this brick of plastic, and then I cut a guitar pick out of it. And it's not great because it's just that particular piece that I cut from. I think I would have needed to make a thinner. It's just like a pain in the neck because I made it too thick. What I might do is remelt this down, press it thinner, and then cut guitar picks out of it instead of the way I was doing it here. But it would totally work, and it is just a brick of plastic. I was going to use this plastic for the nut, for instance, on the guitar, maybe the bridge, again, you know, like to use it as part of the hardware of the guitar. I made this fretless. The reason is I wasn't really exactly sure what the string length would be of where to put the frets. So, and also I wasn't sure it was going to work, so I don't want to spend all the time putting frets in this piece of wood, then gluing it on and having the whole thing fall apart. And I also wasn't, you know, I knew I could have set the string length, but I wanted to mess with it a little bit. So then my thought was, after I set the string length, I would do the Steve Carmichael trick, and I bought cotter pins that you can then cut in half, and they're flat on one side and round on the other. And then you could just glue those onto the fingerboard. So once it was all set up, I could measure it out and glue those on there. Maybe I will in the future, but I decided against it because I thought it sounded really cool fretless. So I'm leaving it that way for now. I can't believe it's been a week now since I made it. I'm surprised it hasn't just completely collapsed yet. I never expected it to last as long as it did. I just figured if I could get one song out of it, that was great. I ended up recording with it for over an hour in order to make the song for the video. And it works. So, like most of the stuff I build is kind of crazy like this. It's a prototype. It shows the potential of the material. It's silly, it's a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you very much. I forgot to mention, if you like what I do, like this is the kind of stuff like I don't get paid to do this. One way you could help support my endeavors, and you know, if it's just for whether I'm making the world a better place by finding a use for all this leftover junk we have, or it's just for the sheer entertainment value, one of the ways you can support what I do is on Patreon, and there's a link below. And I'd appreciate any support I could get. I'm not going to get rich making ukuleles out of CDs, that's for sure. But yeah, so more to come. Thank you very much.